George Grant Goodacre Gatley. A lot of names for a young man from Kenosha, Wisconsin, who would wind up in Yuma, Arizona, and is now in his 54th year as a broadcaster. George grew up living and breathing Boy Scouts. His father was an executive of the Boy Scout organization, and George rose through the ranks to become an Eagle Scout in 1948. During that time, the Scouts bought land for a Boy Scout camp in western Kenosha County. It was purchased from John Tetel, a farmer, who sold 80 acres abutting a small lake. George's dad began building a camp and working with the youth. George began a relationship with the farmer who became his adopted uncle.
I used to go up to the farm and help out and work with him. When I wasn't working for the Boy Scouts, I would go up there and work for him. It was a farm where we had no tractors. We worked with horses. We had 2 Belgian horses that we worked with. We had did all our field work with horses pulling a sickle bar to cut the hay. We had to grind all of our wheat on a power-driven threshing machine at the barn. And the house where he lived had no stove. My aunt used to cook meals on a wood-burning stove. And all their hot water came from a reservoir on that hot stove that they had. And they had a great bathroom. It was an outhouse about 50 feet from the house, and it was papered with all the Sears Roebuck papers and things.
Years that endeared George to agriculture and shaped his life. In 1950, at age 17, George was hired as camp director. At 18, he went into active duty from the Naval Reserve into the Korean War, serving out his 4-year stint as a Navy corpsman. Leaving the Navy in 1954 and attending the University of Wisconsin, George was invited to become a professional scout executive for the Boy Scouts of America and moved to the National Capital Area Council near Washington, D.C. During his 4 years as scout leader, he had the occasion to do radio shows for the Boy Scouts in Leesburg and Warrenton, Virginia. He says he was bitten by the radio bug and in 1956 took part-time work as a broadcaster. Then in 1958, combined his resources with 2 engineers and bought the Warrenton radio stations for $65,000.
The greatest interviews I had were those men and women on the soil, the farmers and ranchers that I had the chance to talk to. They are the greatest people, the hardest working people, and the strongest willed people I've ever known. Every farmer, every rancher is a different story. And it's all the same thing as their will and their strength and their desire to create something that is just fantastic. They have a great will. They're not out there for diplomas and things like that. They're out there to do something they love too, just like I love broadcasting.
George saw great opportunity, but had to relocate to keep up with them. He moved from Virginia to Florida to Wisconsin to Wyoming and then to Arizona, where he had another life-changing event.
I went to Douglas, Arizona for a friend of mine who was the owner of a station in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. I worked for him there, and he sold it, and he went to Douglas, Arizona, bought a station there, called me up and said, I need to do farm news down here. You've got all farming all over the place. I said, okay. I came down, I quit my job in Jackson Hole, and I came down here and started to work for him and did farm news. And that's where actually I started to really do a full-time farm news job.
And there, forming the Western Agri Radio Networks, which now has 15 stations that carry his broadcast each day in California and western Arizona. George attended his first NAFB meeting in 1974 and hasn't missed a year since.
So I get the awesome experience of meeting some of the great people at that meeting. People that I just admire, that I know they're doing great jobs in farm broadcasting, and I always learn from them.
He has served as Chat's editor, Western Regional Vice President, and has been NAFB convention photographer for many years. George is modern in most ways, but just can't give up some of the technology that he has used for many years now, stating that if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Folks, I want you to know I get laughed at because I still use a typewriter. I still have a typewriter here that I use, and it works great. It helps to make out checks and things. I still have a reel-to-reel machine back here, a Tascam, that does great recording my shows. I have cart machines that I use.
Committed to serving agriculture for over half his lifetime, George is as passionate today as ever.
This whole job is a show and tell job. I want to show you what is out there in the world to grow. I want to tell you about it. I want you to understand it. I want you to know that I love agriculture, and you should too, because it keeps food on your table. Folks, I mean that. You don't want to depend on the world to feed you because you couldn't afford it. Depend on our farmers. Support them and love them and care for them because they're out there knocking themselves out without looking for any fanfares.
George G.G. Gatley, founder of the Western Agri-Radio Network, friend of agriculture, we salute you as the newest member of the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Hall of Fame.